The Indian High Schools Group, which is one of the most established education providers here, has announced that it's going to freeze its tuition fees again, and for the seventh year in a row, keeping its education accessible and easing financial pressures on families, according to the school. Joining me now in the studio is Punit Vasu. He's CEO of the Indian High Schools Group. Good morning, Punit. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning, Katie. Good to see you once again.
You've frozen your fees again for the seventh year, even with rising operational costs. What's driving that decision?
Well, it's very, very clear, right? We have a non-for-profit ethos. We are one of the oldest and largest non-for-profit group of institutions operating in the UAE and the Middle East. We've been set up since 1961. So we need to differentiate and we need to set ourselves apart. The fact that we have a non-for-profit ethos, it means we put our learners, our parents, our stakeholders at the very center of all our decisions, right? And again, what's driving this decision is also the Dubai growth story. I think schools are doing extremely well. We have seen the numbers from the KHDA. Indian curriculum schools are almost 34 in number, 100,000 students, 6% year-on-year growth in enrollment. The numbers are looking extremely healthy. We know through Dubai Eye that we got almost 1,000 people, new people coming in to Dubai every day, 70% increase in real estate. So Dubai is just healthy. It's a fantastic growing city. And we are pretty much riding that wave. And we are seeing all schools at pretty much 80 to 90% capacity utilization, which is healthy numbers.
Okay, I mean, it's great you're freezing your fees, and I bet the parents are absolutely delighted. That you must be their best friend at the minute. But obviously, like James said, there are rising operational costs. How are you managing to absorb these costs without passing them on to the parents?
So we have created what we think is a very interesting framework. It's on the acronym of FEES. So the F in FEES stands for fees or sources of revenue. But we take a slightly different view and a slightly different approach. The E and the S. The E in the acronym stands for efficiencies or economies of scale. The other E stands for expansion. And the S stands for servitude or services. So the fact that there are plenty of opportunities that schools across Dubai have in terms of expanding their provision. Just to give an example, Katie, we took a very, very strong, hard look at the kind of extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, after-school clubs. This year, we have introduced ballet, which is very unique as an offering for the kind of audience that we cater to. But again, the numbers made sense. How can schools actually utilize their assets better and provide services that typically parents go to other providers? So how do you actually make it efficient and also make it economically viable for your parent and student base? There's an opportunity to expand capacity, and that's always available.
So if you're getting more children through your doors, that's more revenue. So have you upped class sizes, or have you created a new class? In order to absorb costs.
Correct. So we are constantly increasing capacity because, again, like I said, there's always opportunities within schools to increase your provision. But we're also looking at expanding our provision of services, looking at different sources of revenue beyond the traditional increase in fees. Right. So one of the examples that I can give you is every school has to provide uniforms and textbooks. Right. So we have, once again, signed a long-term contract with a uniform supplier and with a textbook publisher. What does that mean? It means that the pricing of both these products and services are pretty much in line, if not lower than the market. So you're talking about almost an 80 to 90% uptake in sales of uniforms and textbooks. Again, what I'm encouraging and what we think is an opportunity here is for schools to take a different look at sources of revenue. We need to move beyond the traditional approach of just looking at tuition fee increases. And again, going back to the acronym of the FEES, what about focusing on the service attitude, the quality of service? What are we doing for our teachers? Surely, if we focus on teachers and then teacher retention, then there's a huge cost associated with teacher churn. right? And teacher development and teacher training.
We are mid-conversation about school fees. Obviously, the KHDA has approved a tuition fee increase of up to 2.35% for private schools for the next academic year. Many schools choosing to take that increase, owing it down to increased costs in terms of running the school, license increases, lots of outgoings for schools. Punit Vasu is still with me. He's CEO of the Indian High Schools Group. They're one of the most established education providers in Dubai, and this year they've announced again that it's going to be freezing its tuition fees for the 7th year in a row. Punit, thanks so much for staying with us.
Thank you.
We were chatting during the break, loads of questions about this, because obviously you've not increased your fees for 7 years. You have, you were saying that you've frozen school uniform costs in terms of with your provider. That's been happening for around 3 years, so that's helped. You're adding extra paid for ECAs into your offering, which means you get an income from that.
Correct.
What other ways are you trying to get an income without passing it on to the parents?
Schools need to look at the entire asset in totality, right? Take a more holistic approach. So whether it's uniforms, whether it's textbooks, whether it's your sports facilities, whether it's something as simple as an auditorium, which could be used for and leased for various community events. I think if you take a very holistic look at the asset, then schools will start finding opportunities for increasing revenue without having the need to actually pass it on back to parents and students.
We've had a question in for you, the CEO, they've called you. No name, anonymous, but what about the salaries of teachers? Do they get increments?
Absolutely. So all these 7 years, we have a very robust performance appraisal system in place. It's called AGREE, Appraisal, Grading and Rewards for Exemplary Educators, and Appraisal, Grading and Rewards for Exemplary Employees. The fact that we have one of the lowest churn rates in the industry, right? It's obviously testimony to the fact that we are looking after the software, which is the teachers, the educators, and the non-teaching staff. So increments are absolutely very much top of our agenda, and there is no ways that we compromise on looking after our people.
So in turn, does that mean that teachers stick around?
Absolutely. So the fact that teachers stick around, the fact that then we probably have to make less of an investment in new teacher training and new teacher recruitment, all of these costs that we are actually able to absorb or save have a huge impact on the bottom line, which is why then we are not forced to pass on any of these changes and these increments back to our parents. And again, let's not underestimate the value of having long-term contracts. I've said that earlier. The fact that you can have a long-term contract with your maintenance company, the fact that you can have a long-term contract with your suppliers and what have you, allows you to manage inflation. You know very well that costs are only going to go up in a city like Dubai and the way we currently seem to be operating in a high growth stage. So again, for us, it's common sense that we negotiate long-term contracts and almost peg the price of services that we are providing, so that we don't have to pass it on to our consumers.
Because obviously this year there's been no KHDA inspections. Normally, if you would achieve a better grading, you could say put school fees up, or schools could put school fees up by 7% potentially if they got outstanding. So 2.35% perhaps isn't enough for what schools need. But by you not even putting it up at all, is it, your approach seems to me, we have an expression in the UK, so if you look after the pennies, they create pounds. Is that kind of what you're doing? You know, through renting out your space to external providers, through freezing the cost of school uniforms, through using long-term contracts, all that adds up, which means you don't have to pass on extra school fees to parents.
Correct. So you got to make sure that even the smaller bits start adding up. But the key bit that, again, we were discussing is looking after your stakeholders, right? So if you are going to have happier level and, higher levels of well-being and happiness amongst your teachers and amongst your students, we strongly believe that by not passing on fee increases to parents will have a lot more disposable income. It gives parents a choice as to where do they want to spend for their children. And I think that's, again, a very, very critical decision-making metric that we look at. right? Dubai is all about looking after the well-being and happiness of residents and citizens. So we got to be part of that narrative by allowing people to choose where they can spend their money. Definitely has a very, very high impact on satisfaction levels and retention rates of students. And similarly, by investing in your teachers, by making sure that you have robust performance appraisal systems in place, by making sure that we have sources of revenue which we can then use, additional source of revenue which we can then use to invest in our teachers. Like you said it earlier, it means lower churn. It means that our teachers are staying around for longer. And the fact that you have qualified, experienced teachers, surely that translates into better and more effective teaching and educational outcomes. So it all adds up.
It really does. I bet you're very popular with the parents, Punit, being 7 years in a row without putting your fees up. That was the voice of Punit Vasu, who's CEO of the Indian High Schools Groups here in